All right, so this is a quick video. I found I found an interesting video. It shows the difference between some of the three main accents that you might hear. A lot of students often have difficulties with maybe the British accent or the Australian. And the reason I think that is because it's less dominant in media. And in the case of students, a lot of them learn English through media. So since American media tends to be the more common one, then they get used to hearing that accent. But I think it's good to have diversity when listening to different accents because you will hear or you will listen people speaking in different ways. And a lot of the time, the people learning English in different countries tend to learn the British standard. So you will hear that a lot of people do have similarities with the British accent. If you want to check it for yourself, here it is. We're going to leave a like. And I think it's an interesting channel, so I'll subscribe as well. We're going to go ahead and listen to it. Basically, three different people, different accents. They're going to repeat the word on screen. I'm going to say the word how I would pronounce it. I did grow up in the United States, so most of them will probably have an American accent. But I have had interactions with people from different countries, and sometimes I do prefer saying some words how they say it in a different country. So, you know, just I think it's interesting. Let's go ahead and watch it. Let me full screen first. Here we go. Okay.
Banana.
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 Okay. So you'll see in the pronunciation for the American, it's banana. That's how I would normally say it. I don't even know if I could say it with the British accent, but it feels like the vowel is more closed. And the Australian version is similar to the British one. And you will notice that quite a lot. A lot of the pronunciation patterns tend to be somewhat similar between British and Australian, at least in comparison to the stark difference with the American accent.
Tomato.
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 Okay, so this one, another clear difference. I would also pronounce it tomato. Tomato just kind of sounds weird to me because I'm not used to it, but I have heard it a lot. So you might hear that as well.
Water.
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 Okay, again, water is how I would normally pronounce it. Water is more like the British accent. You will hear a lot with the British and also the Australian. They tend to emphasize the T in some words. Normally, when the T is surrounded by vowels, like in this case, it's next to an A and an E. In the English, in American English, it sounds like a D almost, right? Like when I say water, okay? But the other accents, they emphasize the T. And in the case of water, they almost sound like an O at the beginning instead of an A, because they say water. And the ER ending has this very specific, distinct sound. Phonetically, it's called a schwa sound, if I'm not mistaken. That's not really important for people who are learning just to learn, but if it's something that piques your interest, then it's good to look at.
Coffee.
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 Okay, a very simple difference maybe in the pronunciation of the vowel, a bit more closed. I would just say coffee.
Dog.
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 Again, the vowel, and I would say dog.
Shark.
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 Okay, for this one, I feel like the American accent puts a little bit more emphasis on the R. I would say shark, right? Shark. There is a vowel change for the British and Australian, and I feel like the R is a little bit more quiet or less stressed.
Zebra.
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 Okay, and here we have, again, another stark difference. I would say zebra because that's what I grew up learning. Zebra is also commonly heard. This also affects for example, the zebra cross, I think is what they call where people have to walk to cross the street because it looks kind of like a zebra because of the stripes, right? I think the pronunciation stems also due to the first letter. If you've ever heard the alphabet, Z is the pronunciation in American English, and then Z is the pronunciation in British. So it kind of makes sense that zebra, because of the Z in American English, and then zebra, because of the Z in British or Australian English.
Vase.
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 Now this one's interesting. I'm not sure why the variance in the pronunciation. I pronounce it vase, but I do really like the way it's pronounced, vase. It gives it more of like a vibrant sound to the S. It sounds almost similar to a Z or a Z. And it just completely changes the tone of the vowel. Vase is how I'm used to saying it, so in a normal situation, that's how I would say it. But vase sounds really cool.
Castle.
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 All right, just a small change in the pronunciation of the vowel. I would say castle.
Missile.
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 Okay, this is another interesting thing that you might notice in pronunciations. Again, it's a change in the vowel, but it's changing from a short sound to a long sound. So, for those of you unfamiliar, in English, all of the vowels have a short sound and a long sound. Long sound tends to be how it sounds in the alphabet. For example, A would be A as a long sound, right? But the short sound for A, for example, is A, like in apple, right? In the case of the letter I is the long sound, of course, and then it tends to be like the short sound. So missile, right, is the American accent. It pronounces it with the short sound. But the British and Australian, they pronounce it with the long sound for the second I. So they pronounce it as missile. And this is a pattern that you might notice in some other words as well. Okay, now this one, they're not really saying it. They're just showing you that there is a different way of like calling something, right? There's a different word, in this case for cookies. This does happen sometimes. I would reckon that someone who speaks English would be familiar with both terms. So you shouldn't really have to worry too much, but also be mindful of like who you're talking to and where you are. Cookie is just what I'm used to, but biscuit is just as common. So just be mindful of that.
Cookie.
Biscuit.
Biscuit.
All right, and there you have the pronunciations, which I kind of already gave you, but cookie and biscuit.
Candy.
Sweets.
Lollies.
Okay, this one's a bit interesting. So we're going very generic here because we have like the generic American accent, generic British, generic Australian. It will depend a lot on what part of the country you're in. The United States is a huge country. The British accent has a lot of variations within its area. And then for the Australian, I also imagine it's quite similar. Now, these three words, again, I would say most English speakers should know them just in case. Candy is how I would normally say it, but you might catch me saying sweets as well. Lollies is not usually what I would use, more because I associate it with lollipop, which is this image you have right here. Like specifically that kind of sweet or candy. But understandable, like if somebody talks about lollies. you would know that they're talking about candy or sweets.
Sneakers.
Trainers.
Runners.
Okay, another difference in the kind of word used for shoes. These specifically are sports shoes, right? You actually might hear a lot of different variations. Like I grew up using just like tennis shoes as the common term for it. Sneakers is like the base that I normally use. Trainers makes sense again because normally you use sports shoes for training. And then runners because, I guess like one of the main activities you would do if you're doing a sport is running. So you can call the shoes runners because you use them for running. All three of them, I would say, pretty common, just good to know.
Bell pepper.
Pepper.
Capsicum.
Okay. Again, bell pepper, very, very similar. They just add bell in the American English because of the shape. I suppose that's the way I always related it. Just easier to just call it a pepper. I would reckon most people would understand. Capsicum, I haven't heard it used that much, but again, I haven't had the opportunity of interacting too much with Australians. I have heard it though. It's just not something I would use normally because it's not part of my vocabulary.
French fries.
Chips.
Hot chips.
Okay, this one's interesting, and this one might be one of the more confusing ones for students. French fries, I'm not sure what the origin is for calling them French. I don't know if originally they are from France or not. I have my doubts on that. A lot of people just call them fries, mainly because you cook them by frying them. So, that makes sense. In British English, chips, I've always found that confusing because for Americans, which you might see the example in this video, chips are more like potato chips, like the ones you would buy at a supermarket, right? In a bag, like the fast food, I guess, or the snack. Hot chips, I feel, is a valid middle ground because it indicates hot as in like the temperature. So that kind of helps reminding you that chips is referring to like the potato one, the ones that are fried, and not the snack.
Pants.
Trousers.
Pants.
All right, this one's pretty standard. Pants is what I tend to use. Trousers is just as valid for like the generic pants.
Underwear.
Underpants.
Undies.
All right, and for this one, again, very standard. I've heard used all three very commonly. Underwear because you wear it under your clothes. Underpants because you wear it under your pants. And undies just sounds like a diminutive, like a short version of the word.
Sweater.
Jumper.
Jumper.
Okay, for this one, I'm actually not sure why it's called the jumper. I've heard it very commonly called jumpers, but I tend to use sweater more as like the basic term.
Flashlight.
Torch.
Torch.
This is another one that might be confusing. Flashlight is what I use as a standard. Torch just kind of reminds me of the the torch, which is a stick with like fire on top. So that might be confusing for students. But just know that in today's age, no one really uses like a torch, like the actual fire torch. So talking about torch as the flashlight just makes more sense. Okay, here we have a difference in spelling.
Check.
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 All right. If I'm not mistaken, this is probably due to French influence. I'm pretty sure Czech comes from French vocabulary. There was a period in history where French was like very fashionable as a language. So English has a lot of words that they just take from the French language. I reckon Czech is one of them. I would probably have to fact check that, but you know. So the spelling with the British and Australian is how I would imagine it in French. The American version, they tend to change the spelling of a lot of words when they adopted them. The pronunciation is the same though. Czech.
Gray.
Grey.
Grey.
Another kind of similar situation. There's a vowel change for the writing, and the pronunciation changes, I would say, ever so slightly.
Tire.
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 Here we have another example of a change in the writing. Might be confusing for students. When people see tire with an I, like in the American English, it's often common to confuse it with being tired, right? So I like the spelling with the Y in the British and Australian. The pronunciation is the same though, tire.
Jewelry.
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 Okay. This is a very difficult word to pronounce for a lot of students. Jewelry. I feel it's much more intuitive to pronounce it with the British accent because it has that extra sound. It has that extra syllable in the middle because of the two extra letters, the L and the E, which is the same spelling they use in the Australian accent. But if you listen, the Australian accent pronounces jewelry similar to American. So pronounce it how you find it easier. That's the same word, and spell it how you find it easier as long as it's one of these two valid spellings. I say jewelry. It's kind of like a mix. I don't emphasize the extra syllable that much, but I don't think I pronounce it exactly how the American accent does.
Aluminum.
Aluminium.
Aluminium.
This is a famous one. The British and Australian have an extra letter in it, or an extra syllable, and in this case it is stressed. Aluminium. I do like how it's written and I do like how it's pronounced, but I must admit that I grew up with the American pronunciation, which is aluminum. So more often than not, I will pronounce it like that. Both ways are completely valid. It's actually a very present debate amongst people that speak English. Some people prefer one over the other.
Mustache.
Moustache.
Moustache.
Okay, so here, interesting. I'm not too familiar with the variation of the spelling here. Pronunciation is quite similar. You will hear that the Australian accent has an emphasis or a stress at the end and not at the beginning, which is interesting. Both the American and the British have the emphasis at the beginning, for example, mustache. And the British, they change the vowel sound slightly due to the extra vowel included. I just pronounce it mustache, but you can pronounce it however you'd like amongst these different accents.
Airplane.
Aeroplane.
Aeroplane.
Okay, this is another common one that I've seen a lot. I just say airplane because it's what I'm used to. Aeroplane has the extra syllable in it. People sometimes like that. They like having the extra syllable. Maybe it makes it easier to pronounce. It's just not what I'm used to, but you could definitely just use aeroplane. Small shift in the writing as well.
Pajamas.
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 All right, pretty similar pronunciations. Pajamas. Slight change in the writing. Not quite sure where the origin of the word pajamas is. It might be Arabic, because there are some words in English that are Arabic, although I might be mistaken. Writing, I normally write it with an A, American way, but you can definitely just write it with a Y. I think the Y actually makes more sense based on how it's pronounced. It's just kind of a strange thing like that because I'm not used to it.
Color.
Colour.
Colour.
Okay. This pronunciation for the ending in the British and Australian, you will see that it is like a lighter pronunciation. They don't really emphasize much at the end. So color, kind of similar to water, right? It has that similar like schwa sound. In the American accent, much more emphasized color, right? It's like very closed at the end. This is probably due to the change in the writing. There's an extra letter in the British and Australian. And that's the end there. So that's great. Of course, there's a lot more words that you can find differences in. This is just like a general like measurement for the pronunciation. And of course, there is a lot of variety in pronunciation, especially with English being such a wide spoken language. So, you will hear a lot of variety. It's good to get used to it. We might focus on a different video with different accents at some point in the future. I think that would be interesting as well. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, just feel free to let me know and we can discuss them.